Thank you so very much for your patience, everyone. We are now getting underway. My name is John Tiggs, and I'm the event coordinator here at Robertson Booksellers. No one ever applauds me, so I do have to drink that in a little bit. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is in Treaty 1 territory, and the traditional initial territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Of course, and most importantly for this store, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are thrilled that you could join us here this evening, both in person and virtually, as Tanya Talaga returns to Winnipeg to discuss her new book, The Knowing. The Knowing is, of course, a riveting exploration of her family's story and a retelling of the history of the country we now call Canada. We're so very grateful to HarperCollins Canada for publishing this book and for making this evening a possibility. Please rest assured you will not have to listen to the pasty settler for much longer, as we will be bringing out our special guests for this evening. But just a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. The event will consist of a conversation which will take place at these chairs to my left. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. So please do let those percolate over the course of the evening. And if a question arises during the Q&A, please just put up your hand. I'll approach you with this handheld microphone, which ensures anyone watching at home can hear the question. And then we'll put that to our special guest. The only thing I'll put in your mind right now before we reach the end of the event is that we'll ask you to stay in place right at the end, because we do need to safely transport Tanya Talaga to the signing table beside our cash desk so a signing can begin. But I'll have more scintillating details about signing for you at the end. For now, I have the great pleasure of introducing tonight's special guests. Your host this evening, David A. Robertson, is a two-time Governor General's Literary Award winner and has won the TD Canadian Children's Literature Award and the Writers' Union of Canada Freedom to Read Award. He has received several other accolades for his work as a writer for children and adults, podcaster, public speaker, and social advocate. He was honored with a Doctor of Letters by the University of Manitoba in 2023 for outstanding contributions to the arts and distinguished achievements. He is a member of Norway House Cree Nation and, thankfully, lives in Winnipeg. He is the author of 5,000 books, and we're particularly excited about a new book he has forthcoming in January, also from HarperCollins, All the Little Monsters, How I Learned to Live with Anxiety. David A. Robertson. I'm particularly delighted to be able to introduce our next guest. Tanya Talaga is of Anishinaabe and Polish descent and was born and raised in Toronto. She is a member of Fort William First Nation. Her mother was raised on the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation and Treaty 9. She's the acclaimed author of the national bestseller Seven Fallen Feathers, which won the RBC Taylor Prize, the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for political writing, and the First Nation Communities Read Young Adult Award. A finalist for the Hillary Western Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction and the BC National Award for Canadian Nonfiction. The book was also CBC's Nonfiction Book of the Year and a Globe and Mail Top 100 book. Talaga was the 2017 to 2018 Atkinson Fellow in Public Policy and the 2018 CBC Massey Lecturer. She is also the author of the national bestseller All Our Relations, Finding the Path Forward. For more than 20 years, she was a journalist at the Toronto Star and is now a regular columnist at the Globe and Mail. Tanya Talaga is the founder of Makwa Creative, a production company formed to elevate Indigenous voices and stories. Please give an incredibly raucous round of applause for Tanya Talaga.
Bags and my things. Here we go. Hello.
All right. We're good. Ready to go.
Oh, we're ready to go. Oh my gosh, this is imposing.
Oh, I have,
This is sorry. I'm gonna do this all night.
like you can just greet people all night if you want. Nobody would like that. So, welcome to Winnipeg. And I should always mention whenever I do these things that this is the greatest bookstore in the world. And John, come on. He's, you know, I want him beside me when I go to sleep at night, just talking to me. Please. John, I've got a great voice. He does have a great voice. Yeah, he does. So quick little story. Tanya and I had never met before in person, and which is odd. And we've known each other over social media, and we love each other. And then I was in the hospitality suite at Calgary WordFest, and then in walked Tanya, and Tanya has this I think it's presence, and so everyone kind of turns around. There's Tanya, and I was like, oh God, finally, Tanya Talaga. And so
it's a long time coming.
Yeah, we got to meet finally. Now we're here. It's awesome.
Yeah. And
the knowing is awesome. And so I have John overrepresented my body of work.
I don't think he did actually.
1,000 books.
I think it was 5,000.
That's way high. But I do have 1,000 questions. And so I'm going to spend some time asking questions. We're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to do a Q&A as well with the audience. So if you have questions you want to ask Tanya, we'll spend some time doing that as well. Okay. So and the fun thing about that is when we finally start doing that, John will be running around all over the place, and so we like to see that. And
oh my gosh, there's a question already. Is there a question?
Oh, you do? Okay, Jordan.
Is it Tanya or Tanya?
Oh my gosh, it is Tanya. Yes.
Tanya.
Thank you very much.
Did I say Tanya?
It's okay.
Oh my gosh.
You know, I answered to both.
Awkward.
It is, you know, it's
thank you, dear child. Appreciate that.
It's, you know, I answered to both. It's just.
But it is Tanya.
No, it is.
Well, now we know.
Thank you.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't do my homework.
You're lucky my uncle did me out here.
I'm so sorry. I have a very obvious question to start out with.
Okay.
But there's a bit more of a layer to it. And I'm first of all wondering what inspired you to write The Knowing. But I think as well, I'm wondering, because the book is this really brilliant blending of personal narrative and this collective, what I would call this common experience in colonialism and residential history and a lot more, but into this comprehensive history of Canada from our perspective. So I'm just wondering what inspired The Knowing, and then how did you go about blending that personal narrative with the larger conversation of Canada and colonialism?
Yeah, so there's a really long answer to that.
Go ahead.
You know, and it's not 450 pages, but it's pretty damn close. It was the book, honestly, really was started by my uncle, my great uncle Hank Bowen. He had all these papers. He had been, for the longest time, looking for any information that he could find about his grandma, Annie, and about his mom, too, really, Liz. He had so many questions who was his grandma? Who was Annie? Where did she go? Yeah. In 1930, she was gone. What happened to all the women that he knew in his family? How come they never talked about where they were from or what experiences they had, which residential schools they had been to? He didn't know anything about them, and it ate at him because he didn't know about himself, right? He was raised with Liz, who never talked about this, and his dad, Alphonse Rusty Bowen, and he is Anishinaabe. He was a trapper. They lived out in the bush. They lived in Graham. It's known as Graham, Ontario. So it's the bottom of Treaty 9 And then they moved to Wraith, which is where my mom spent most of her girlhood. When she was younger, though, she was really at Graham. It's a place where it's in Northern Ontario, about an hour and 20 minutes outside of Thunder Bay, north-ish, west-ish. And it's where all three treaties meet, actually, Treaty 3 and Treaty 9 and Robinson Superior. And this place is the Arctic watershed. It's where all the waters on Turtle Island either go north to Winnebago, Kitchie, Winnebago, so Hudson Bay and James Bay, or they go south to the cities, right? And so he grew up like not knowing much of anything, right? And he wanted to know more, and he wanted to know why it was we weren't more proud of who we are. What had happened to his mom, really?
Right.
But he was looking for himself. And so he had this filing folder that had notes in it of people that could possibly be related to his mom and to Annie. He had baptism records. He had death records. He had maps of Northern Ontario First Nations that were circled. And he had like notes written in the margins, like, could this be a place that we're from? Just no idea, really. And the most, well, there's a few really disturbing things in this filing folder for me. One being Annie's death certificate. That's basically all he really had on her. And that was just, it said that she was a patient at the Ontario Hospital, and she was put in the hospital in 1930, and that she died in this hospital in 1937. And she had spent 7 years, 8 months, and 28 days in this hospital. But what was this hospital? And where was she? And there was all of these, like this death certificate. And when you've got a death certificate that shows, it says, who's your mom, who's your dad, how old are you? Where are you from? Question mark, unknown was everything that we saw. And then on top of that, when he would write the Ontario government Department of Vital Statistics, ask if they had any information about his mom, Liz Gauthier, he would get letters back from the government that said that she doesn't exist. And we have no record of your mom existing at all. And it's like, well, that's not true. He's like, I exist. I had a mom, she's got to be somewhere. There's got to be some record, some paperwork that tells her story or gives me a glimpse into that. And so when he died, about 13 years ago, it eventually, this filing folder came to me, and I would kind of look at it every once in a while, and I'd get pretty depressed about it. And I would be like, this fucking sucks. Like, I just put it back, right? Because I also didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know who to call, like, who are all these people? What do I do? And I was a journalist, like an investigative journalist for like 25 years, But when you're dealing with government records, when you're looking for information collected by a country that was actually they didn't care about keeping our records. Right. About accurate records about our people or our families, right? And so looking is so incredibly hard because you've got so many different spellings of names, which I encountered so many times. And so when you asked me that question, I know I told you it was going to be a long answer. Yeah. This is why, right? It's just, so he started the book, really, right? And then my Aunt Connie, his sister, and then it was my mom. It was my mom who was saying to me, I'm 80 years old now. I don't have a lot of time left. Find Annie, get to it. And so it was her really that went.
Yeah, and it's it's unique to your family, this search. But at the same time, what I found is that it is also such a common problem in a lot of our communities and families to have this happen. And I remember when I was doing work on Blackwater, I was looking for my great aunt Maggie, who died at day school.
Mm.
And the same problem. We have her death certificate. There's no information on there. We don't know when she died. We don't know how she died. We don't know where she died. We don't know where she's buried. And I've spent the last like 5-6 years trying to find all these things out, and it's just not, it's not there.
Right, and that was actually part of the reason when I was writing the book, the title, The Knowing, that's where that comes from too, very much so, because every single First Nations family has a story like ours. Every single one. You know, if it's not in our own families, it's in our communities. Right?
Yeah.
We've all heard of people that didn't come home from the schools, from tuberculosis sanitarium, from asylums, from Indian hospitals. They're just gone, but we know that they're there.
Right, yeah, and you explain that so beautifully, but so devastatingly in the novel, the concept of the knowing. And I think a lot of, you know, my dad used to go live in Melita. He was a reverend in Melita, a small southwest town in Manitoba. And we used to go out there with my mom. We would drive by an RV park in Brandon. I think you mentioned this in the book. And my dad used to tell my mom and us in the back, it's like there's kids buried under that RV park.
Yeah.
You know, and that was something he was talking about in the 80s and the early 90s.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about that, thought a lot about that when I was reading your book. And I wondered, like, you know, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but like, can you explain more about the title, The Knowing, and what does knowing signify for Indigenous communities and in the context of this book for us as Indigenous people in our communities and our families?
So in 2021, May 2021, I got an email, came into my Global Mail account. And the email said, was from someone I'd never met. Her name is Coy. And she said, hi, you know, you don't know me, but I've read Seven Fallen Feathers. I've read All Our Relations, and our community is familiar with your work. We like your work, and we would like you to come and tell our story. And that's when she said, you know, there are a potential 215 graves of children that we found at Kamloops Indian Residential School. And she said, we're asking you and a few other Indigenous journalists to come out here and tell our story. And so I literally got to the end of this email and that's when, boom, I just left. I just, you know, I grabbed my stuff. I just went to the airport. Like, I sent a note to her saying I'm coming. I sent a note to my editors, David Walmsley and Natasha Son. I said, I'm doing this,
right,
just so you know. And I went, and Ray was amazing. She's like, okay, let me know when you get here. And so I went there, and I got there just as the community had set up. There were volunteers, and they had roadblocks everywhere, and they were only letting in First Nations people that were, you know, familiar with Kamloops, the Indian Residential School. And I got in there, and I remember parking the car and not knowing what to do or where to go. And it was at the back of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And this man parked beside me, and he unrolled his window and he's like, hey, you're not from here. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And then he said, I told him who I was, and he said, it's okay. He goes, come with me. And he grabbed his drum, and he was a survivor. And he took me to this circle, and it was in the parking lot, right beside what is called their Moccasin Flats, like building, right? Moccasin, yeah, it's funny. Anyway, there's a little community building, and they had a sacred fire right there in the parking lot, and there were survivors were sitting around in you know, the little white plastic chairs from Canadian Tire, and like we're all sitting there, and they were all talking about how they knew there were their friends, their classmates, and people they heard of that didn't come home, and they said, this is the knowing. And when I heard that, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is our community, this is our families too. And so that's why it had to be the title of the book, because it's more than, you know, words, it's what we know.
Right, yeah. I'm wondering about the self-care that you needed in writing this book, because there's a lot of heavy truth that I'm sure weighs on us as Indigenous people. Reading it was difficult,
Mhm.
but writing it and doing all the research and investigative work and putting this all together into this narrative. What was that like for you? Like, what kind of self-care did you practice when going through the development and writing of this book?
I appreciate that question, you know, and it's one of those questions you get and you're like, oh, I wish I could tell you that I was in ceremony every weekend, you know, and like I was doing all the things that I should be doing, but that's not true, right? Like it's not. When I do something like this, I don't know if I'll ever do another one like this, to be honest with you. It's a pretty epic book. Yeah, I just go right under, like everything is about my research in the book and I just kind of tunnel down. And I sit at a chair for a really long period of time, or I just get really sort of tunnel visioned. Yeah, and I'm grateful that I have a supportive family and a dog. Because I go with my dog, like, you know, if the dog doesn't care that I'm, you know, writing like the biggest book of my life, dog's like, I gotta go to the bathroom. And we live in Toronto, so you gotta get up and we have to walk to the lake or we have to go here, right? And so honestly, it was my dog and I run. Like if I didn't have that, but I knew there would be times, and you know, I do talk to Elder Sam Ashley Penenscum every day, right? And I have for a long time, since 7 Fallen Feathers, and he was always checking on me and saying, you know, are you okay? Like, what are you doing? And he's like, you're not in the lodge, you need to get in the lodge. It's been a long time, how long has it been? And it's like, oh my gosh, I would like to say that I was in the lodge 2 nights ago. So I was like, about was in the lodge. But it's hard, but yeah, I could go on about that, but it's okay.
Really, like, it seems like there is ceremony, there are things that we can do, but I think you also find your own medicine.
You find your own medicine too, and I also, I don't drink too.
Yeah.
I stopped drinking about 2 years, 3 months ago. I won't tell you the days, but because I realized I couldn't do that. Right.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't, I didn't want to anymore too, because you see what alcohol has done to our people and to my family. And it's like, you know, I can't even have a glass of wine, really. And it's just like, no, it's not all right. And so that was part of my self-care, because also too, like, you know, imagine writing a book like this and like drinking like, okay, I'm gonna have like 3 glasses of wine tonight, or, you know, because you would just get.
Well, it becomes like a crutch, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't know, I was like, you know, I needed to be as mentally clear as I possibly could be, because I was so hyper aware of the research, and it had to be right. It had to be right because of denialism, because of all the people out there that say, you don't have the records, you don't have the proof, you don't have the truth, right? Now we're seeing it all over the place. I mean, it's horrible, and it just doesn't stop. So I knew I had to be bulletproof as well, and totally spiritually clear that way.
I know that I think when you're talking about that denialism or the revisionist history that's happening, there's just an article that came out in the National Post about Murray Sinclair, and I know, first of all, I want to ask about Murray, because he is you know, such an important figure for a lot of us, I think for all of this country, and I know that he was a support for you in this book, but I think also just in your career. I wonder if you couldn't, first of all, talk about that relationship and the support that you received from him, and maybe just the impact that you see that he has had on your work, but I think also just in this country. I think it's appropriate to honor him.
Absolutely.
At least for one question.
I appreciate that. No, we can do more. We can do more.
We could,
you know, Murray, I met him after I wrote 7. You know, of course I knew of him, and I was like, you know, wow, I thought he was like a giant. He was like, he was like a warrior, man, who did like all this work. And, you know, if you've read the TRC, you're just like, it's unbelievable. And the work he's done and how he spoke, I was always like the biggest, like, you know, that was like my hero, right? And then I didn't get a chance to meet him until he became, after the TRC, he was the investigator into the Thunder Bay Police Board. He called me to be a witness. And that was in Toronto. That hearing happened in Toronto. And I remember going and feeling really nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually gonna meet Maurice Sinclair. And I've never been like, what am I gonna say? And what is he gonna ask me? When I met him, I had all these thoughts in my head. You know, I was thinking about my family. I was thinking about the 7 fallen feathers. I was thinking about all of our experiences. And so when I shook his hand, I just cried. And and I thanked him for the work he's done on behalf of our families. And he laughed and he said, don't worry, I get that reaction often. And that was the start of our friendship. And he had a copy of 7 Fallen Feathers with him. And he was like, this book blew his mind. And he had all these tabs, he had been through it, and he said that it helped him formulate that inquiry into the board, and also into the recommendations that he formulated at the very end of it. And I would turn to him. I would turn to him for help. Like, you know, when I wrote All Our Relations, I was struggling in some parts, and I'm like, how am I bringing this all together? You know, and it's both of my books, all 3 are on genocide, but at the time, you know, I'd written 1, 7 was definitely on the effects of oppressive colonial policies, what it does. And then number 2, book 2 was the same thing. Like, you know, it always goes back to that same, you know, foundational issues of imperialism and, oh my God, Terra Nullius, like everything, right? And so I called him and we started corresponding too. And he helped me a lot with the 4 questions. We talked about those 4 questions and they became a cornerstone of the Massey Lectures and of All Our Relations and of something that I talk about all the time, you know, and those were a gift from Murray. And then when I had, like, I know I'm going on about how great he is and stuff, and then when I had problems in my life, I would call and ask him, like big problems, like, you know, when I was leaving the Toronto Star and the circumstances I left in, I called him and I asked him for help. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, is this, you know, and he would help me. And also in Kamloops, I called Murray. I'm like,
and that's in the book.
This shit is going down right now. Like, this is like, I don't know what to do. Like, all of us are just kind of, it was just like nothing we'd ever seen before. And I called him.
I'm thinking a lot about how this book, while it deals a lot about the Indian residential school system through your personal story, but also the wider breadth of that history. But as well, this book, it also addresses so much more about the systems in this country that have been marginalized us, that have harmed our communities and our families and individuals so profoundly. And I'm wondering about your view on the breadth of reconciliation and what we're doing now and what we should be shifting to, I think, to take a wider view and to learn more about the history of this country and the systems that have put in place and the harm that they have done. Because you talked a lot about, you know, for example, the Indian hospitals and so much more in this book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when I was finding more out about Annie, you know, finding out about where she was from, what our family had been through, you know, finding out more about her, I was following her life. And here she was, this incredible Innu woman, and she was married at 18. She had all of these kids, right? Liz was number 6. Found those 5 kids, like, you know, we sort of thought maybe she had kids, more kids, and she did, you know, and what happened to those children? Where did they go? The system took them, right? And so I started to sort of go deeper and deeper. And I realized that I had to tell the story of Canada again, because in order to understand what happened to our family, you had to re-understand what Canada was all about and how it was formed, right? The TRC was a huge help to me, volumes 1 and 2. But also, you know, and that's our history, like how we've written it like that, you know, just incredible. And then we have our community history. Like I had Paula Rickard and Lawrence Martin, Jason Martin, like helping me, you know, saying, this is the family tree, these are the Carpenters, this is who they were and where they lived and the stories that they knew. And then I started looking at how we thought of women and why women are so erased from our history, especially First Nations women. They're just gone, right? They're not recorded properly. And today I was in the HBC archives and looking at, you know, wife of Jabez Bunting, you know, and she brought in one large otter. Like it was amazing, but just wife of, right? Like the women are just gone. And I was like, what is that? Like, and, you know, and if you read contemporary history, you hear about these country wives, this romantic notion of women, girls that were 12 and 13 that were married to, you know, men 30, 40 years older than them that were coming over as trappers or traders, and they didn't know the land. Well, how did they get to know the land? They had women help them, right? Girls help them with language, with what to eat, where to grow things, you know, what to kill, how to eat those things. This country wives notion that we all grew up with in our history books was just BS to me. Those women were taken, they were trafficked, and then they were erased. And if they are written about, we hear about this, you know, oh my gosh, the name is escaping me. He's a really famous explorer, and he had a young Cree wife, and they stayed together forever. And didn't they have a beautiful, wonderful, happy marriage? Did she have a choice at 13? Like, you know, really? And all these children that she had? No, I don't think so. So this to me is the beginning of MMIW. This is the beginning of trafficking, and it's right in front of our faces. But, you know, you have to tell the history through our eyes, and you see it different, and you see the HBC differently, and you see Rupert's land differently. And who were the ones, like, then I got obsessed with, where did all these ideas come from? Where did the Indian Act come from? Where is that othering of us? I've written about othering in 7 Fallen Feathers of Our People and in all our relations. Why was that second-class citizens? Why do we never talk about caste in Canada? Why do we never talk about class? And then I read Isabella Wilkerson's Caste, and that blew my mind. And I said, we should be talking about that here, and we don't. And who, you know, when we look at the foundations of Canada, who were the governors of the HBC? They were all businessmen from London and from England, and they all had ties, almost all of them did, to slavery, right? They had ties to the African National Company. They had plantations. Mr. Ellis here, Ellis Avenue, was a slave owner, right? His family, you know, and those were the ideals that started Canada.
Yeah.
The foundations of Canada, right? You can see it.
Yep.
It was like Rupert's land was a giant plantation.
Right.
It was like Canada was a corporation. It was created to send money back to the motherland, right? Because that's what imperialism is. Like in this, but in Canada, we never talk about this. We look at it in a different way.
Right.
It's not that romantic, actually.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard and it's awful and brutish.
We are doing a lot of through work like this, recontextualizing what this country really is and what it was. And it's such an important movement to see happening. One of the things that really struck me in the book was a narrative in there about Emily Murphy and her work as a driver in the fight to allow women to vote, and yet at the same time, while she was fighting for this equality, Indigenous women, she believed, would become extinct. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about the recasting of historical figures like that, or the recontextualizing, or the truth that we now know about some of these historical figures.
Right.
And I think about like how, you know, she was someone who was made into an honorary senator. But we have statues that we've erected to honor
That's my
architects of
favorite too.
genocide.
Yes, the famous 5 in Ottawa.
Right.
They've got like, you know, that statue of them, and it's like, are you flipping kidding me?
Right.
Like Emily Murphy, you know what she said about Indigenous girls? And, you know, she thought that, you know, most of the, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but she thought that pretty much our girls were dumb and they were slow, and that we would be extinct. Right. There would be no need to write about us or to celebrate us anymore, because they will be gone. She was, in particular, she got me too, because she was at Elkhorn Indian Residential School. And one of the things that we discovered about Annie's daughter, Christina, was that she was taken from outside of Dennorvik, so outside the Sioux Lookout area, and she was forced transferred to the Elkhorn Indian Residential School. And this is like where she never left Winnipeg, Christina. She died here in a rooming house. And we didn't know anything about her. I didn't know about my great aunt Christina.
Right.
You know, and Emily Murphy was at that school, so-called school. But that again is another, like, that whitewashing of Canadian history, like Emily Murphy and the famous 5. You know, the right to vote for some people.
Right.
Right. Again, the othering again.
Right.
You know, and it's just, we just need to tell the story in the right way.
Right. And then what do we do? Now that we have this unprecedented access to truth, what do we do about the honoring of these historical figures who have been architects of our genocide? You know, you mentioned Ellis, and we have Ellis Avenue here. Even though we
talk about the Selkirks.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's do that.
Oh yeah. Put her picture in the book too.
Yeah.
Lady Selkirk. She was a Wedderburn. Her family were the Wedderburns, and the Wedderburns were huge slave-owning families. They had plantations in the Caribbean. They were not nice people. You don't have to take my word for it. You just Google it, you know, it'll all come up. And she was the one that did a lot of the running of the business too, the HBC, when her hubby was off doing other stuff, right? So, yeah, I mean, do we celebrate her? George Simpson's another good one too.
Well, and the important point I think there is too is that taking down a statue, renaming a street, whatever it might be, it doesn't erase history.
No, it doesn't. You know, you can, like, you know, Cindy Blackstock will say this too. I've heard her say this, you know, put up another plaque. Put up the plaque, you know, maybe beside the famous 5, let's put up another plaque about how they believed in eugenics. How they believed that we were going to be erased eventually and going to die, you know, die off. Why don't we put up one of those plaques, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of, Murray always said this too, there is so much more truth to be told before we can get to reconciliation. We need to hold a mirror up to Canada. Right?
Yep.
And that work is not yet done at all.
Right. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the clock still hasn't started for where we need to get to. You know, we hear elders and say that healing is gonna take 7 generations, but in a lot of ways that trauma is still happening.
Oh, yeah, it's totally still happening. It's called child welfare.
Yep.
Right? It's called incarceration of our people. Like, look at the jails, or why are they mostly filled with our people?
Especially Indigenous women,
Yes,
vastly
Yeah.
overrepresented in the
Absolutely.
prison system in Canada.
absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
foster care, we have about 60% of all kids in
Mhm.
foster care are Indigenous.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. I know, and birth alerts are still happening.
Mhm.
They happen all the time in Manitoba.
Yeah.
You know, we're still fighting to have high schools in communities in Northern Ontario, right?
Right.
And clean water and hoses that work when you hook them up to a fire truck. You know, it's basic infrastructure. It's still a fight. And how do we change that?
Yeah.
How do we change that? We know what we need to do,
Right.
right? It's actually getting the political will to make those changes.
For sure. Yeah, and I think so much of that is a movement of the people, with the knowledge that they accrue through stories like this. It always starts with knowledge, right? And then knowledge hopefully turns into action.
Yeah.
And I think Jody did that really well in True Reconciliation. She articulated that really well. But it's books like this, I think, will help motivate people, inspire people to take action, or to realize that they have a role in what we need to do, because it needs to be a collective movement, I think.
No, it does, you know. I could go on about also too, you know, Martin Luther King, right? You can change all the policies you want in the world, all the legislation you want in the world, but you can't make somebody want to have lunch with me at a lunch counter. And it's true, it's still the same thing, right? Like, we can't wait for governments to make the changes. We have to, you know, make sure every person is making that change, is wanting to make that change, right?
Well, and I think you mentioned Bryce in your
Yes.
book. And so we talk about, you know, I always said, if you're going to wait for Canada, the government, to lead us into reconciliation, or to change policy, or whatever it might be, you're going to be waiting a very long time.
It's ridiculous. No, you know, it's, you know, sorry, I'm gonna stop cutting you off, but.
No, you can't. You're on.
No, it's like, that's why teachers are so important, right? That's why teachers
Absolutely.
and again, I'm gonna reference Murray, because he always told me and everyone else, education got us into this mess, education's gonna get us out. It's like every single teacher is gonna take this book and is gonna teach it in school instead of The Last Spike or the books on the fur trade, you know? That is what the change is gonna be, and we can't wait for school boards to make those changes. It's like the teachers are gonna do it.
Yeah.
Pick it up.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah. And you're doing it.
They are, it's
Yeah.
awesome, you
Yes.
know, I love that. And you know, you probably have this too, like, you know, a lot of the book events you have, it's teachers that come, they're educators, and they wanna learn, you know, they wanna take those books.
Yeah, one of the things I feel so inspired by is, you know, I do probably about, I don't know, a couple hundred school visits a year. And I talk to all these kids, and the change that I've seen in the last 15 years is very hopeful, because it's the kids that are gonna really create change, you know?
100%.
And the teachers are gonna guide them. And I think that is, it says so much about our education system, and the drivers of change in our education system are the teachers.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, but we still, like, while I was saying that, like, so that's the immediate, is the teachers, but the longer term is education reform.
Yep.
Like, there's no excuse at this point now that we have curriculums that have not been updated and changed, when we have so many Indigenous teachers out there who have done the work and who continue to do the work. It's no excuse, right?
Right. I just actually, it's funny that you should mention that, because I think we have, like, I have it at the front of this, but in 1991, my father was writing this paper here about education reform in Canada.
Wow.
Like over 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And the stuff he's talking about here, we still haven't done yet.
Oh, I know, yeah. And when the National Indian Brotherhood, the beginning of the AFN, they also wrote a paper in 1971 calling for quote unquote native control over native education and more books and like everything, you know, everything we're still fighting for 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, my dad called it local control, same thing as what we're trying to do. I want to open up for questions. I have one broader question for you. It's not like,
Is it a hard one?
no, it's a softball,
Okay.
but it's probably predictable too. For this book, I mean, I guess I would just ask you, what would be the main message for you? Because there's so much to learn here. You want readers to what you want readers to take away about the ongoing journey of reconciliation we all are on, or should be on, and the healing taking place in our communities. What is the main thing that you want people to take away when they read The Knowing?
Well, there's almost two answers to that.
You can do two answers.
For First Nations people, this is one story, one family.
Right.
If every single one of our families was to do this and was to tell our stories, we would change the narrative of this country.
Yeah.
Every single one of us. I really fully believe we need to do that, because not just would we change the narrative of this country, we will show that we are not these Indian Act and communities that we were forced onto too, with reserves, right?
Yeah.
We are people of the water and of the land. Annie's story shows you the water, Saskatchewan. We moved with the water, At the HBC today, I was looking at maps, these beautiful maps that were done by our people. They don't have borders and like, I own this piece of land, I own this one's for you, and you can have this one. And no, it's just amazing to me. And we have to go back to tell our stories, that belonging concept that Murray talks about all the time. That's where you find it. That's strength and pride in who we are. And you see, we are so much more than what we have been told we are. So that's one answer.
That's a big one.
That's a big answer. So that's what I hope people do take from the book. Or people take from the book, but also Canadians, like non-Indigenous people, do they read this and they understand what happened here, the violence of our history, the movement of it, the complexity, and how tied it was globally too. I mean, I honestly, it was the work of other scholars too that helped me get here, like Anne Lindsay. Her work is incredible. And she also worked with the TRC to get those volumes done. She talks about the webs from England, the webs of imperialism and the fur trade and the beginnings of slavery, how it's all intertwined, those families, those connections.
Yeah.
That's important for us to learn as a country if we want to heal the spirit of Canada.
Yeah.
To me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I could ask you questions all night, but I want to give the audience a chance too. But first, I think, first of all, John, hi John. John just like popped his head out. He's like, I'm still here and my voice is still awesome. But I wonder first if we can just give Tanya a big round of applause for.
And you too.
Oh. Thank you, sir. It is a transformative work. It's an incredibly meticulously researched work, but it's also a deeply personal work. And I think one of the amazing things about The Knowing that I felt when I was reading is that I saw so much of my own family's history, that's what you're talking about in the pages of this book. And so it's a really incredible achievement. For the audience, we have time now. If you have questions for Tanya, please ask away and make John run.
Make John run.
Hello, hi, bonjour Tanya. My name is Jasmine. My English name is Jasmine, and my spirit name is Bidabanukwe, and that means coming to the dawn woman in Ojibwe. So I just wanted to say thank you. This book, I was an Indigenous studies scholar, and I was often taught by non-Indigenous people of my own history. So this book really resonated with me, like it was sharing stories with a cousin. So thank you for that, Miigwech. But my question is, as somebody who is learning and exploring my own family history, And I'm not an investigative journalist. Like, do you have any tips for somebody starting out to looking back?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's not easy, right? Like, no, I said I avoided trying to get that work done. And in the end, I had industrial level help. Like, to be totally frank with you, Kim Murray, who was the independent special interlocutor and who was actually the executive director of the TRC, she helped me quite a bit. Paula Rickard from my community helped, one of my communities, like many as it turns out. But, you know, go to community. There is every community, First Nations community, has someone that knows everybody's business, right? They know your history. They know who married whom, when that happened. They're usually women. Those women are so valuable. They're community genealogists. So when I started, I turned to Facebook. I really did. Like, I found this page, James Bay Community FYI. I went to this page and I'm like, hey, anybody know any carpenters in the James Bay area? 45 minutes later, Paula Rickard answers me. And she's like, oh yeah, I know about the carpenters. And then she's like, she started helping me. She's like, here, here, and here, right? She knew where to look. She knew how to access church diocese, local church diocese records, where they were, because they're not usually in the church like the St. Thomas Anglican Church in Moose Factory. No, they're actually at Laurentian University. That's where the diocese has them. Like, you have to get to know people that know where things are too. But turning to our community, your community, that's the best spot, like, because they help the most. She was the one that gave me the records, the burial records, the baptism records for Annie's children. Because why? Annie married a Samson Lemestigous. And so he turns out to be my great-great-grandfather, not the man we thought was. It's just complicated, it's all but you know what I mean. So I would say start there, because our communities hold so much knowledge. The NCTR also helped me.
I just submitted all my mom's records.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
hopefully that's like the start.
That'll help too. But it's a long wait. I don't know if it's gotten any better. And we also need to push, this is another thing that we all need to push for, is Library Archives Canada, less than 5% of what they hold is digitized. They have so many of our records. They have, like, for the book, I used so many letters I found of Indian agents talking about Annie Carpenter and her kids, her families. That was in there. And that's from the digitized records that I could find. So Library Archives Canada is another wonderful spot, but you actually have to physically go there to look at the records. Yeah, I could go on a lot about records. And also too, hopefully I don't know where you're from, but some of the communities have started, like most of them, like the Southern Chiefs organization, I'm sure they will have a department right within there that is looking, that is head of research and is starting to look for our kids. Like in Sioux Lookout, there's a Bringing Our Children Home initiative. There's one in Shingwalk too, the Children of Shingwalk Alumni Association. You'll find these places. Yeah.
Hi, I'm just wondering about the book industry. So how did you, Tanya, did you choose David, or how did he come here to host?
That's a very personal question.
How does that work?
How did he come to host it?
No, no one else is available.
No,
Choice number 13.
No, that's not true at all. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. Okay, I asked one person before, and that was Sheila Rogers, but she couldn't do it. And there's a reason why.
That's a good first choice.
Yeah, because well, there's a whole anyway. She'll probably tell the story, but so I know Sheila, like So and then David came, and. Oh, you mean, so it's more of a logistical question. No, so we shared a publisher.
I mean, typically when you have a launch, you can, you tell your publisher who you'd like to host the launch, and they reach out.
Yeah.
Typically,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Thank you for being on number 2.
Sheila does send her regrets and her love and mentioned that David would probably do an acceptable job.
Sheila.
Oh, there she's always.
Sheila's busy being Chancellor of Queens, so yeah.
I know, eh?
Awesome. Yeah.
Tanya.
Yes.
Kim Wheeler.
It's Kim Wheeler.
This is Kim Wheeler. I just wanted to ask you to talk about the documentary that goes.
Oh, thank you very much for that question. It wasn't planted whatsoever. So yeah, so we did a 4-part documentary series that at the same time I was writing the book. Yeah, and you asked me about my personal health and how I handle all that kind of stuff. And why did I do that? Because I knew that there would be people that wouldn't read the book. They're just gonna watch it, right? And how do you reach everybody? Well, I'm not gonna reach everybody, but how do you reach more people? You do it through documentary film. And also too, I was going to these places and I knew it's happening once and it's done. It's done and gone. We need to get that on film, right? The 1-year anniversary of Kamloops, I had to get that on film. And not just that, I had to go back to a family I met, the Williams family, when I was there the first time around. I wanted to go back and I wanted to sit down with them. It was Gary Williams Sr. and his brothers and sisters. He was the oldest one. There was 14 in his family. 7 went to Kamloops, 7 went to the mission school. Except for Gary went to both, and also Kokalitsa. And I wanted to get his story on film because I also know that our elders, our family members are also getting older. Memories are going even faster. And I wanted to show Rome, that hunt for an apology. You know, we had to go and beg for an apology, right? I wanted to show that what it was like to go there with all, you know, we were on a plane with the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, all the priests, you know, it was crazy pants. You know, and the Métis were there and Inuit were there too. And like, we don't normally all hang around together, right? And take a plane and go to Rome and do this kind of thing. But we did. And we stayed in a Best Western hotel. That had to be documented, right? And then the apology when it happened. And I didn't want all of us, all that we would have is mainstream media's coverage. APTNs too, but I wanted our coverage, like I wanted to get behind and see what those people's, what the faces looked like, you know, when he said the words, and he only said it once. He said it again in Iqaluit, but when he was here, not in Nunavut, he said it once. And he didn't talk about sexual abuse, you know, like that first apology, it was just like, is that it? Does anything come with it too? Like anything? No. So that had to be recorded from our eyes. So thank you for that question. It's on CBC Gem, all 4 parts. It's also on YouTube. Free.
Oh, we have Beyond.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi.
Rosanna Dear Child.
Okay, Rosanna.
Oh.
Dear Child and Wheeler are just like, that's Kim Wheeler.
Hi, Kim.
CBC.
Unreserved. Sundays. Anyway. Thank you for being you, first of all, Tanya. You're amazing. And your work is amazing and changing the landscape of this country and how we tell stories and how we claim them, or rather reclaim them. Just to follow to my very good friend over there, Bestie Kim. After writing this book and doing all the research and how involved you were, and then doing the documentary And you know, that is a mountain of storytelling right there. How has taking that journey changed you, Tanya, as a person in terms of, as Murray's 4 questions teach us, knowing where we come from, who we are, and then knowing where we're going. How has that changed your journey as a person?
Thanks for that easy question. This could sound weird, but I feel calmer. There's a better, I don't know, it's more peaceful, you know? I've been in a lot of communities, sitting with a lot of survivors. And it's been a real honor to carry those stories, to listen to them. But it makes sense, right? Like, that feeling of calmness and belonging makes sense. I mean, when I went to Saskatchewan, the river, Fort Albany, Petobic, and knowing that I was the first person from my family to be there in 100 years, right? Because Annie left when she was 18 when she married Samson in Moose Factory. And she never went back. And we found her sister Clara's grave in Fort Albany at Old Post. And all the people that I'd known in my life too, right? And in my reporting life, my journalist life, Edmund Metatawabin, Mike Metatawabin, how long have I known them? Why am I always writing about Treaty 9? Why am I always writing about Treaty 9 and the intersection with Thunder Bay, right? Why am I always trying to get to the heart of what started this in the first place? Where did this othering come from? Why is it there? It all makes more sense to me. And when I am in these communities, and it's not just Fort Albany, it's also Lac Seul First Nation. And even today being in the HBC records and looking at over 150 years of people coming up the river from Fort Albany all the way to Lac Seul First Nation, Sioux Lookout, Cat Lake, the Bamatong, all of those places, those ties, places I've been to, and you feel this connection, and now then I see it in the records too, right? And then meeting people like in Lac Seul, I met Roy Carpenter. He's our cousin. And he's like, and I met him, you know, the book was done there with my documentary crew as part of, you know, and I was there, the community, and I've been working with the Lac Seul community too. And I have these records and I go and Roy Carpenter and I sit with this man and he tells me, oh yeah, I know all about the Carpenter brothers. They came up from Albany and they came, you know, up the river. And I'm like, well, why the hell wasn't I here first? Like the book's done and you're telling me all this stuff now, you know, and then that connection with him. And you asked me what I've learned too, right? We've gone back to every community Annie was in and every community that we filmed in, and we've shown them the series. We've had a talk, we've had books, we've given away books, and then we've had a feast. And it's been amazing. Like in Fort Albany, Chief Kataquapit, Deputy Chief Terry Metatawabin, it was like, they said, welcome home, right? Yeah, that was like, it's so hard to describe that feeling. It's just, you just know it in your bones.
The young person here is the perfect way to end the question.
Exactly. This is our final question before we go to closing comments, and a very important one at that.
No.
Were the parents of the children in residential schools allowed to take them back?
Oh, that's a really good question. Were the parents of the children in residential school allowed to take them back? Thanks for that question. Well, sometimes there were day schools, and so the children went during the day, and then they went to their homes at night. But sadly, it was against the law for many, many years in Canada for our families to take their children back home because the parents would be in trouble with the police if they didn't surrender their children. And sometimes so the police or people called Indian agents, they would take the children away. And it took a long time for that law to change. But it did change and the schools shut down. Yeah, but it's important that we talk about what happened and remember them. So thank you for your question.
Would either of you have any closing comments you might like to offer?
Wow.
I'm just glad to be here.
Oh, it was just a very emotional question. So, I'm very grateful, number two, here. I'm glad to know you. It's my honor to know you, and I'm really glad to see all of you here. Like I have family here, you know, and to be here a week after Murray's death, you know, his service, and I remember this book has been taking me all over the place, right? And he helped me with this book too, and I had been trying to get a hold of him for a longer time. I knew he wasn't well, and you know, he lost his wife, Catherine, and he called me in the last stages of writing this book, and we on the phone for 3 hours. Like just this massive Murray like talk, and it was just like amazing. It was like he sounded good, and we were talking about everything, you know, and it was just like this giant hug through the phone, right? And then when he was not well, I was here in Winnipeg because I helped Nigon launch Murray's book, right? And then we did the same in Vancouver, and then Nigon was supposed to be there and he couldn't come. And so we knew that it was, you know, going to be soon. And then when the service was announced, you know, I just so grateful we're talking about him, because then I was talking to Michael Red Hill Champagne over there, and he had the same experience as me. I was in Millbrook First Nation in Nova Scotia. It's a Mi'kmaq community, and it was like, do I lead this community? You know, that's where I was supposed to be on the day of the service, or do I come here? And I stayed there, and I spoke to community about the book. And it was like Michael was saying the same thing where he was on that day. It's like, well, Murray would say, we know what Murray would say. And isn't it amazing that he left us with such clear tasks, right? There's no question that we don't question at all what he wanted us to do, right? That was his gift to us. And so I'm thinking about him so much here today. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Tanya Talaga.
Thank you both so very much. Thank you all for your attention, for your warmth, for your questions this evening. It seems churlish to follow that up by going over sign-in procedure. So I'm just going to offer some gratitude right out of the gate. And we're so very grateful to David A. Robertson for stepping in to host this event. So grateful that you could all be here to be a part of it. And of course, so very grateful to Tanya Talaga for making the time to come through. Thank you. Thank you. And,
Do I slither out of my chair now?
Oh, you can slither while I talk. I'll serve as a distraction. Although I will move that.
That's easy.
So we will ask you to remain in place for one moment because we do need to transport Tanya to a signing table before she can sign any books. So I'll give you an alert when you can all descend. It's a table that's right by the cash desk. It's very clearly marked. You can't miss it. When you get in line, I will be interrogating each of you. I'll have some Post-it notes and I'll just be writing down your name on them. It's not because we don't trust you to spell your name. It just means you can spend more time talking than spelling when you actually do get to the table. There are copies of the book at the table. There are copies of the book at the cash desk. I'll pass out copies to you. We'll make sure you get a copy of the book in your hand and you can get it signed before you pay for it. Just please do pay for the book at some point. Thank you again to HarperCollins for making this possible. Thank you to all of you and to David A. Robertson and Tanya Talaga. Have a wonderful evening.